Welcome, everyone, to the Asian Voices radio podcast, where you'll find real Asian American conversations, including all the topics you are too afraid to ask your Asian parents. I'm your host, Melissa May, and I'm so excited about our guest today. His name is Steven Nakamura, and he is considered among the most accomplished feature film colorists in Hollywood, having worked alongside directors such as David Fincher, Ridley Scott, Kathryn Bigelow, Spike Lee, David O. Russell, and Steven Spielberg. His feature film credits include The Five Bloods, Sicario, Day of the Soldado It, Chapter 2, Crazy Rich Asians, The Martian, Alien Covenant, and many more blockbuster epics and award winners. Most notably, in 2018, Steven was accepted into the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Woo! Welcome, Steven. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Melissa. Glad to be here.
Well, I think the most amazing thing about this short little intro is that out of all of the directors and features I mentioned, that's just the tip of the iceberg of your resume. So let's just jump right into it. Start from the beginning. How did you get started in the film business? And was it always something you wanted to do, or was your path going somewhere else before?
It's something I always wanted to do. And I went to Loyola Marymount University and I studied communication arts with an emphasis on film, television. And I originally wanted to be in production. So I was in production. I interned while I was at LMU. And I did production. I did business side of film, distribution. And then I figured out that I probably wasn't that great at any of those things. So I got into post-production. So right after college, I got into post-production, and I originally tried to be an editor at first when I was like 21. And I just said, I don't think this is for me either. And then I was working at a facility that had colorists, and I became friends with them, and I became a junior colorist. And so I've been doing it ever since. So I found something that it fit my personality and my skill set. So that's how it all ended up happening.
It's pretty crazy, Steven, that sometimes you need to do something to learn that you don't want to do it. And
Right.
It may take up a little time, but then you know that this isn't a passion of mine. So I'm glad that you finally found your passion in coloring, because I don't think Hollywood would be the same without you. So did you have any inspirations growing up? Since, Asian American parents, maybe yours included, don't necessarily encourage their kids to pursue careers in media or in film very often?
Yeah, so I think it was kind of a surprise for my parents when I said I want to be a communication arts major. And that really came about because I was really good at math and science. Surprise, surprise. And all my test scores said, hey, you should be doing something in math and science. But even though I was really good at it, I didn't want to do it for a career. And my school counselor basically said, well, what do you do in your spare time? I said, well, I watch movies and I love watching TV shows. Okay, great. There's this thing called communication arts. You can major in and you can do that for a living. That's all that was. It was a 10-second conversation. She handed me a bunch of pamphlets for all the West Coast schools. I grew up in Hawaii, for all the universities on the West Coast. And I chose LMU, and that was that. That's how simple that was.
Wow. Easier said than done, I'm sure, but like all the puzzle pieces seem to fit right where they needed to be.
Yeah.
So can you explain to our listeners and maybe myself in layman's terms what a colorist actually does and how important it is to the overall look of a film?
Sure. So the colorist is necessary for basically anything that you see on television or you're looking at it on a big screen. Everything has to go through a colorist to be colored, because essentially the shots don't match in a really simplistic form, right? If you're shooting an exterior day shot and you've got take one and it's sunny, and then take two, it's cloudy, and take three, it's sunny again. And the editors are chopping that all up, take 1, 2, 3, and back to 1, back to 2. The shots don't match. And so a colorist is basically there to match the shots, make sure everything looks like it was all shot at the same time. That's in a really simplistic form. What we'll do, we'll if the whole show needs to be saturated, we'll saturate every single shot. If it needs to be desaturated, we'll desaturate every single shot. So we can create looks, we can set the mood. We're basically like using, it's kind of like Photoshop on steroids is the way I explain it to people. You're basically painting pictures electronically. We take the cinematographers' images that they captured and we help enhance those. So that's what we do.
Ugh, I bet some influencers would love your skill set. They wouldn't even need filters. They could just use you. But in terms of attributes or qualifications for those that don't know how to get into the colorist scheme, or what if they have the right skill set, do you believe a person should have in order to become a successful colorist? And does having an artistic or technical background help?
It does help. You basically just need to be, have a really good sense of contrast and color. So, I mean, if you're colorblind, you can't be a colorist, but you have to have a really good sense for color and feel. I mean, that's essentially what we all do, is we can take images and we can kind of shape those images through our lens and the cinematographer and director's lenses. And we can kind of shape those images so that when you look at that particular scene, you'll feel a certain way. And that's basically the skill set of a colorist. So if they were shooting something just like a regular day exterior, and then we needed it, the director says, hey, I want it to be a really somber scene, a colorist can take that sunny day and kind of put it into a color space where it doesn't feel that inviting. Maybe it's a little bit colder. Maybe we take some of the highlights down and, make things a little bit grayer and stuff like that. So, I mean, there's just a myriad of ways we can do things to affect the feel of your show. And that's what our skill set is. And so if you have a really good sense of doing that, then you can be a really good colorist.
The fact that you can change the atmosphere of the feel of a film just by changing color is so remarkable to me, because I have noticed, when it is more of a somber tone of a feature or whatnot, it does tend to get a little bit darker. And then when something's super, happy, it tends to be a little bit brighter. So you must have like pixelated, detail oriented. You must be like pixel oriented, like, ooh, what is it like working with top directors and cinematographers like the ones I mentioned in your intro? And do they listen to your input on a project, or is there sort of a give and take when it comes to deciding on the look of a particular film? Because I'm sure some cinematographers and directors have this image in their mind, and maybe as a colorist you're like, that doesn't necessarily work. Is there some give and take?
Yeah, so there's a lot of give and take, and most cinematographers and directors work with certain colorists all the time because they have a real good shorthand, right? Like we can give them what they want without too much direction because we have the same sensibilities, or we can share their sensibilities with them. So that's your skill set that you have to have.
So it seems like there has to be some level of trust between you, the director, and the cinematographer, all kind of symbiotically working together.
Totally. 100% trust. If you don't have the trust, you don't have a relationship, really. Kind of like in everything in life, right?
Hey, I have that relationship with my hairdresser, but don't tell. Sticking with the topic of Hollywood, have you ever experienced any bias or felt you have had to prove yourself more being an Asian American? Or do you have any stories from other people that may have experienced some bias, or maybe some good stories about being an Asian American in Hollywood?
I haven't personally. I mean, I've been in this business probably since 91, I think. I haven't personally felt that, but that doesn't mean it hasn't happened to other people. But for me personally, I don't think that's affected me. Me being Asian or minority, I don't think that's really affected me. I think at the end of the day, people want to work with people that they get along with. They share the same sensibilities. Like if they work with a good colorist or you're a good architect, I think people just want the best.
One film that I was particularly interested in that you colored was Crazy Rich Asians. Do you get this little sense of pride when you see, a complete feature with just Asian Americans in it? Did you get some sense of pride, or maybe the fact that, Asian Americans are now being represented more in feature films?
Yeah, I totally had a lot of pride color correcting that, and I'm really proud of my friend John Chu, who directed that, we had a conversation on his previous movie that he directed. And, we were just talking about him being one of the few Asian American directors that are in the Hollywood system, for features that gets greenlit. And, we talked about him having this voice for Asian Americans, kind of like, Spike Lee had for the African Americans back in the 80s when, Do the Right Thing came out, which was, highly influential for me as a young man. And lo and behold, his next movie was Crazy Rich Asians. And, it did really well, and it was like a groundbreaking movie. And so I'm so proud of him till this day.
I'm telling you, for children especially, for them to be able to see people that look like them in feature films, I feel like is not only it will be inspiring for them to maybe pursue in feature films, because it is to become an actor, actress, I feel like is a lot of people's dream. But those people of color that may not have seen people looking like them on the screen may now be extra motivated because now there's people that look like us on the screen. So I'm glad that you had people to look up to as well. In terms of the colorist world, did you have a mentor that comes to mind in particular? And was he or she Asian American or just a great colorist?
My mentors were not Asian American. They're just great colorists. And I sought their advice as a young colorist, which I think is really important for people, right? Like, if somebody's really good at their craft, especially in the arts, you basically want to get as much knowledge as you can from them as a shortcut for your life, really. I mean, you don't have to learn to create the wheel on your own. There's a blueprint to how to make a wheel. So if you happen to be working with them, you should ask them a lot of questions, which is what I did. And anything, if I had a piece of film up that I didn't, when I colored it, and it didn't look right, I would basically put that thing up to one of the senior colorists when I was a junior and an assist. Say, hey, can you color correct this for me? Because I couldn't get this thing to look right. And they would do, something in like 5 seconds, and it'll look 100 times better than anything I did. I'd be like, what did I do wrong? And they would tell me. And you learn, right? So, I think that sort of try to be egoless especially when you're in the arts, and just learn as much as you can.
Is there one particular piece of advice or knowledge that you took away from either your mentors or you learned yourself that has stuck with you today to make you the colorist that you are?
Yeah, I think there was a guy that I had worked with who basically said, you really don't want to have a look, because every film is completely different, and every movie and every TV show is completely different. So he says some colorists have looks, and they make every movie look the same. And that's essentially not what you want to have and want to be as a colorist. You want to basically treat every movie and every TV show, everything that you're doing on an individual basis, and cater your coloring just to that project alone. And so you kind of have to be like a chameleon with color, and not try to do the same things all the time to have that kind of look. So I've always remembered that from him, because he would say, like this colorist that we used to work with kind of has the same look for all of their shows. And I'm like, oh yeah, they kind of do have a look for all of them. So he would say, that's not great. You should have a different look for every show. They almost should not know you've colored it, right?
Although I do you have any signature things that people would know, like this is a Stefan Nakamura production? No?
None.
Well, I guess that's a good thing in your line of work. Circling back, going back to the conversation that you had with your parents when you decided, hey, mom and dad, I want to go to school for arts and media and whatnot. Can you, I'm sure it was very recent, but could you just walk the listeners through how that conversation went things that maybe were brought up during that conversation that, another fellow Asian American that wants to be in the arts might go through and maybe give a little advice?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a difficult conversation because my parents are super supportive of me with anything I wanted to do. I think they were worried because I wasn't, this person that knew how to draw or paint or did a lot of art stuff. But I know I was really interested in it. And I know I'm the type of person that I'll come in early and stay late at anything that I do, right? So whether that's, was studying or playing sports or whatever, like I was always of the mindset, like nobody's going to outwork me. So, and I'm really good with people. Like I really like people. And in high school, I was like student government, all that kind of stuff, right? So I remember telling my mom, she was like, you can't do any of these art stuff. Like, what makes you think you can do this? And I said, well, there's a different component to just being an artist. And part of it is you have to have really good people skills. And a lot of the art students that we had in my high school had terrible people skills. So, it's one thing if you say, hey, I can paint really great, but if you only paint in your garage, you can't make a living at it, right? You have to sell your painting. So you have to have people skills. And so I always thought I can learn this if I can figure out where I fit in, my skill set can fit in. But I really, really love people. And I really am very inquisitive. And I like to learn. And, I had friends of all different types in high school. So I know I can kind of get along with anybody, right? So, the jocks and the scholars and the surfers and whatever. I mean, I had friends of like, everyone. So I was pretty confident at the end of the day that I would do well in whatever profession I ended up with inside of the film business. So that's how simple that was.
I think it's wonderful that your parents were so supportive, and it just seems like they wanted you to be happy. And for listeners that are listening right now that may or may not have challenges with their parents, I feel like just sitting down, talking it out, and saying you're passionate about something maybe will help your parents kind of change their views of maybe going to school for a particular certain thing. And if this will make you happy, that's all that matters. So I'm so glad your parents were supportive, because who knows where you would have been.
Yeah.
So speaking about the company that you work with, Company 3, it's the leading post-production facility based in Santa Monica, lucky you, that works on major Hollywood films as well as commercials. How did you find yourself at Company 3?
Company 3 was started started by a guy that I used to work with at the Post Group when we both kind of first got into business. We were assistants together on a night shift. So we had known each other for years. And then we became colorists around the same time. And, we kind of shared the same clients that we grew up with. And so around 2007, we kind of joined forces. And that's kind of how that happened, really. Yeah.
Oh, the people you meet, you always try to keep a working relationship because you just never know.
That's right.
So, Stefan, the next question is kind of a two-part one. In terms of the favorite film that you've worked on, and then maybe an interesting story about some of the high-profile directors. So favorite movie that you've worked on, and then maybe either a story of why you really like working with a particular director or cinematographer.
Well, I don't know if there's a favorite story.
They're all it's like your children. They're all your favorites.
Yeah, all the stories are really great. They are interesting in their own ways. It's a really interesting situation to be in when you really think about it. Like a movie, they'll be in pre-production, they'll shoot things, they'll shoot it, they'll cut it together. I mean, sometimes it's like 2 years later from the time, maybe even longer, from the time they originally decided to sign on. And we're basically the last part of the chain, right? The coloring is the very end. So visual effects comes to us, we color it, it's approved, that gets married to the sound, and that's it. That's your movie. And so,
you're the gatekeepers.
Being in the final part of the chain, and you're kind of at the finish line, You hear a lot of stories from people in a dark room when it's just the two of you alone, And so there are a lot of really great stories. But, those are all private conversations.
Absolutely. Totally. Totally. I didn't know if one stood out for you that really made you laugh or something, but I totally understand. Even I feel like all of Hollywood is NDAs.
Yes.
So I totally understand. I have a lot of questions about the movies that you're currently working on, but I know that they're in post production now, some of them. So, getting to what advice would you have for any young, aspiring Asian American creators or filmmakers out there who want to pursue a career working in films and also to potentially become a colorist?
Yeah, my advice is, same advice I give to almost everyone, which is just keep trying things inside of the business. If you can get internships, that's really fantastic because you get to meet people and you get to see how everything works. So if you come to a post-production facility like Company 3, there are conform people, there are producers, there are colorists, there are engineers. I mean, there are many different facets and many different jobs inside of the post-production facility. And in production, there are, a myriad of jobs. The main thing is to identify something that you naturally have a skill set for. Because if not, you're going to just struggle to be above average, right? So I always tell people, if you look at like a kindergarten class, almost every kid has something that they're a little bit better than the rest of the kids, just by waking up in the morning. There's just, there's some weird thing that like every kid has where they're like, somebody can read better, somebody can add better, somebody's faster and can run faster, somebody can do a puzzle better. Everyone has a really great skill. Every human being does. If you can identify that skill and monetize that skill, you'll be really successful and you will essentially have passion. Sometimes it's like the passion really is something you're really good at that, people praise you all the time and they think you're really great. And all of a sudden you become very passionate at it. And it's happened over and over and over again. I've met professional athletes that like didn't want to play the sport that happened to be extremely good at it. I know like a NFL player that's won many Super Bowls that when I met him in college, he said like that's clearly his number 2 sport. And he liked basketball so much better, but he wasn't that good at basketball. But for some reason, he's really good at football. And he's still in the football business today, right? And so it turns into a passion because he's so good at it.
I wish there was a job or something lucrative for ice cream because I love all types of ice cream. And I feel like if I could just sample ice cream for the rest of my life, I think I would be very, very successful. But, live and learn. Maybe someday, you never know, I could become a taste tester. You never know nowadays. Going back to the history of filmmaking in Hollywood before the digital age, how could the looks of films be altered when they were actually shot on film stock as opposed to on camera?
Oh, sure. Back in the old days, they would be at a lab like Technicolor, and they would have lab timers doing what we do. They didn't have the digital control that we have. I mean, we have so much control that if you have a magenta fuchsia blouse, I mean, I can latch onto that and change it to be green, right? But they couldn't do that in the old days. They can basically take your film and make it brighter, make it darker, put a little bit of red, put a little bit of blue, put a little bit of green. They can adjust the photography that way, but they didn't have the ability to, go into each eyeball and sharpen it and make it brighter, or, put a window over someone's face and darken everything around them. They didn't have that kind of control, but they were great craftsmen that did amazing work. And, that is basically the job we, or someone like myself, took over when the digital revolution came about in around the early 2000s. So yeah, that's what they did.
Even like editors from back in the day that had to cut the film and then put it together, and then that's how they edited. I can't imagine that must have been really tedious. But
Yeah.
what as we're wrapping up this this interview, if you were able to go back in time to your younger self and look at yourself in the mirror and say, Stefan, what advice would you give yourself?
I would give myself the advice that I kind of just told you, which is you just got to find something that you do like almost as a hobby in your spare time. If you like to do something, then pretty much try to pursue something in that realm if you can, because your natural inclination is that if you're not getting paid, you'd still do this anyway. So that's a really great start.
That's a great gauge.
Right? It's a really great gauge. And then figure out where your skill set lies within that field. Right? Like if you're a great speaker, or you're a detailed kind of person, or you're not detailed, but you're a big picture thinker. There are many different career paths in every field that you can try to go to. But hone in on things. Keep honing in on things that like your skills, your natural skill set, your natural strengths, can benefit you in that way. Because what you'll find is that when you end up doing something where you don't have a natural skill set, you're just going to struggle to just be above average, right? It's like that whole concept about basketball, where you can have the starting 5 basketball team, and they'll play the second string basketball team. But if you put all 5 players out of position, the second string team beats them all the time, because they're you can't put a center at point guard, right? Like it's not their natural position. So they could be great and one of the best in the world at a certain position, but if you move them to another position, they're completely average, right? So it's that concept. If you are put in position of something you're interested in, that you have a natural affinity for, you almost for sure will be successful. All you have to do is have great work ethic and build rapport with people, and you'll be fine. I wouldn't worry about anyone. I think they'll.
Well, hopefully our listeners are taking notes and wrote all that stuff down, because I feel like what you're saying is pertaining to film, if you want to pursue in film, but then, like you said, also for life, which I feel like is very important too.
Sure.
But unfortunately, we are almost out of time today, but I want to thank our guest, Mr. Nakamura, for sharing his amazing career with us. I feel like there's so many other stories you could potentially tell us, but we only have so much time. And I hope his story will serve as an inspiration to all those listening. Stefan, do you have any social media or websites that our listeners can follow you and learn more about what you do?
Sure. Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Stefan_Nakamura, or STEPHEN_Nakamura, NAKAMURA. And I'll, when my projects get released, I'll post some pictures up, sometimes share some stories and, things like that. So they can follow me that way.
Oh man, you must have some amazing behind the scenes footage, photos. Oh, it's pretty amazing. Once again, I want to thank our guest, Stefan Nakamura, for joining us today. If you have any suggestions for future guests or topics, we'd love to hear from you. Also, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, as well as follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Asian Voices Radio is produced by Asian Culture and Media Alliance, a nonprofit that empowers our API community with a voice through media arts. If you would like to support our program and make a donation, please visit AsianVoicesRadio.com. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Melissa May. Please join us next week for another exciting and thought-provoking Asian Voices Radio show. Until next time, take care, everyone.